Hey, let's talk about games. Hello again, my friend. Welcome back to another video of the Let's Talk About Games series. Today we're going to be talking about the Farm 51's game known as World War III. Now, the Farm 51 are both the developers and the publishers. They are over in sunny old Poland right now, and they've come out with a couple of other games, such as Get Even. I think that was the most recent title they came out with, which was kind of a first-person survival horror shooter with a bit of a sci-fi techno twist. We've currently got the intro cutscene for this game in the background at the moment right now, World War III. I have to say it's perhaps not the best demonstration of the actual game, so what we'll do is go straight into the menu and start talking about it. Now, the actual game itself is a first-person shooter which is going to be compared copiously to Battlefield, although I would state right off the bat it is making its own way into the FPS genre and doing its own thing. Just before we get into talking about anything too critical about this game, I want to make it very abundantly clear that this is an early access, and I want you to know that any criticism I give is out of sheer love and hope that the game will do well. But that being said, there will be a long list of criticism for it, as will be the case for most early accesses, but it needs to be done. So, to start off with, let's go over to the settings screen, as all good reviews should start. We're going to go down to the video settings because that is a very fundamental place to start. Now, full screen mode, worth pointing out, does not actively use exclusive full screen mode. My mouse can disappear off the side of the monitor onto my other here, so I'm not exactly sure if full screen is actually full screen and not just another windowed full screen pretending to be. But anyway, always nice to have the ability to choose which monitor actively. I've had copious amounts of problems with that in the past. All of the other field of view, etc., everything here that you would like to be here, sliders when necessary. You also have the option to disable motion blur, and, well, that is about it thus far. If we go over to advanced, you'll see a few other frame rate options, resolution scaling, always handy to have, dynamic range, etc., and a bunch of other things, dynamic resolution. A bunch of stuff I will be honest I don't know everything about. In terms of anti-aliasing, we don't really have any choices as to which types. We just simply have low, medium, high, and ultra for all of the various settings. Now, the game runs okay. It doesn't run absolutely butter smooth, but it runs pretty well on the system. I'm not going to have any complaints to make about frame rate right this moment, although that being said, I haven't been in too many absolutely whopping battles as of yet. We'll talk about that in a moment. So let's go over to the actual gameplay settings. This is something I want to bring up, and a fairly big one. We have quite a lot of choice from colours that you can apply when you hit an enemy, when you hit a team member, or when you see a team member. So if we go to hit markers here, we've got a whole different array of colours for where you hit different things. Now, this is actually one big gripe with the game. If you're buying this game and loading on straight in, change this colour and general hit from blue. Reason being, if we go back over to here, and I don't know where this choice came from exactly, but if we go to the gameplay options, you'll see your team is blue. You'll see the hit marker for a general hit, meaning somewhere of a non-vital area, is blue. Every time I shoot someone and I see a blue hit marker, I automatically think to myself, oh, you know what, that's probably an ally, and stop shooting. They turn around, shoot me in the head and say, haha, you shot me in the arm, I'm actually an enemy. So definitely something to consider there, and something I would think about changing. The hitboxes and the hit markers can be divided into armoured areas, headshots, general hits. We will come back to that in a moment when I do copious amounts of dying within the actual game. Key bindings as well are all changeable. There are quite a few to pick from, and there are a few perhaps more buttons than one would expect of a shooter of this nature. We have some slides, some go prone and then roll over type buttons. There's quite a bit to choose from, and thus far I have no issues with the controls, although I would say I would rebind them personally to my own preferences, but that's obviously a more individual thing. Now, in terms of the actual main home screen here, I do have another small gripe before we get into the gameplay. We've got a few more things to do before we get into the gameplay. One has got to be what is going on with this font. I don't know if this is just me out here with my aging vision, but I actually have to bring my head far closer to the screen to get a very clear vision of some of these fonts. Maybe I just need to go back to Specsavers, but this is the only game right now where I actually feel my eyes are straining to read what's going on. I can read it. I can read that says ally controlled down here. but it hurts my eyes a little bit to do so. Perhaps this is a case of being on 1440p monitor, so maybe that's got something to do with it, although I have tried it on a 1080 and it didn't really make much difference. But in terms of the overall UI, specifically regarding the font choice, I think that needs personally to be adjusted. Now onto something a little bit more interesting for the majority of you, the actual customization screen. Here we have a soldier, just our soldier. We don't have an array of soldiers, we have our soldier. He does have a bunch of different kits, but we'll go through those in a moment. First, let's start with the visuals of our soldier. So we select the soldier on the top left over here, and then we select the visuals over on the right. Now, we can choose anything from helmets to berets to hats, you name it, you have it. There is quite a lot of choice. Now, normally this stuff is purchasable in-game, not with a actual real-life currency. There are no microtransactions with the game as it stands. This is purchasable via an in-game currency, which you earn by playing the damn game. This is a nice system to have. It's nice to unlock stuff. You unlock gun components as well in a moment, and we will come to those shortly. But unlocking visuals, having a customizable character is all very well and good. It takes me back to sort of Rainbow Six. That was the first game that made me fall in love with customizing a military character. You can go for weird face paints too. There's quite a lot of choice. If you go back to the actual character himself, you can also change his main emblem, which, if you feel the need to, you can do so, and you can also choose his flag as well as his emotes, we will call them. So you have a few different emotes to pick from. You can go for the classic insult, and I have to say these are actually quite well done. You've got the threaten, you've got a bunch of other things, and it's not too bad. We'll just check out the dance emote before looking on. We're not going to go through all of them. We've got better things to do, but you have F1, 2, 3 for the different emotes, which is a nice way to pass the time when you're a little bit on the bored side. So, voiceover, you can also change the actual, well, voice artist who is doing, I think, there we go. Let's just get a few lines out of him.
Roger that. Confirmed. Roger that. What up? Jawohl. Servus. Jawohl. Verstanden. Hey.
As you can see, I think it's a nice touch. It's nice. I like it. Over to the equipment now. We have 3 loadouts, and then we can change tab and get another 3. It's a weird way of configuring them, I think, rather than just having or being able to mouse wheel through. But hey, I can survive this and put up with this for now. So here we have a bunch of different weapons, and here we get to really see the Unreal Engine come into effect. I mean, you know this is the Unreal Engine the moment you look at it. You can just tell from the lighting that it's very Unreal, and it's also very pretty. So let's go over to the gun. We're going to go for the light one here, the number 2 that we have, and we're going to have a look at what weapons are available. Now, something that took me a little while to do is you can actually close on the right hand side all of this, and you can come up with each weapon individually. Rather nicely, there's no limitations on how many assault rifles you can carry. By that, sorry, I mean you can have 2 weapons and there's no limitations on what those 2 are, but it will affect your movement speed. So this is similar to picking the clothing. If you choose heavier clothing, which comes with more armor, which we'll go through in the gameplay, you do move a little bit slower, but it does give you more armor. Currently, weapon variety is feeling a little bit limited, just by the mere fact that you've got, say, 2 snipers, 2 shotguns, 4 assault rifles. It's a good starting point, but I think more will be very, very nice to have. In terms of the weapon variety, in terms of their, let's say, gunplay, there is a bit of a difference. I've been mucking around mainly with LMGs, SMGs, and a few assault rifles and 1 sniper, but there is a bit of different choice available here. I think what we'll do is we'll pull up an SMG just so we can get something like a SIG out, and then we'll have a look and see what we can customize. So we go over to the scopes, and you'll see that we have different iron sights available for those of you that like to be able to actually see what you're shooting at. Some of these sights are horrendous, some of them are far more tolerable. Now, something, again, not a massive fan of this UI, having to close it by clicking this tab, but it's not the end of the world. I'm just not a fan of navigating menus like Reddit tabs. I think there's better ways to lay things out. In terms of scopes, magnification is nearly always going to be a preference, but I'm going to try the I don't know, we'll try the M145 scope. Now we'll go to the secondary sight, and you'll notice you can put another sight on it as well. You can have another iron sight. There's quite a bit of customization. Barrel length, you can go for a medium, a long, or a short. We'll go for a short, and there we go. We now have a slightly easier to maneuver weapon. We can look at the muzzle as well, and we can go for a different bunch here. Flash hiders, suppressors. We can go for this suppressor, that suppressor. And suddenly we've got a gun that's actually looking a little bit more, let's say, personalized. Now, in terms of what we have going on here with gun effects, if we click over these, where we have a look down here at the actual gun stats, which again, I'm going to come back to saying the UI display for this is fucking horrible. I can barely see, I can kind of make out that word recoil. Obviously that's reload time and such. But if I go between a flash hider, okay, do any of those numbers change? Okay, and then we go to suppressor. Does anything actually change? As far as I'm aware, no. Obviously, I'm not asking it to change, but I'm not exactly clear if the suppressor has any influence right now. If we look at the actual damage over distance over down here, what we'll do is we'll bring up this. There appears to be no change. Compensator, again, appears to be no visual change. At least if there is one, it's not something that's being well presented to the user. A little piece of feedback. It may just be that it's not been implemented yet. So early access, we shall be forgiving, although we shall remain critical. We'll go for a grip, and as you can see, basically you can just keep on going and adding and adding and adding until you've got something very, very personalised. And this is something that I think is just simply beautiful. You can even paint the damn thing too, although I would say I prefer a gun to look like a gun, not like something from Call of Duty. And what we'll do now, I think it's time to actually look at the war map. The war map itself is where you can choose what to play. Now here's where we go into the actual gameplay in just a moment. We have 3 available. One is just there for show at the moment. The map has not been implemented, and we have 2 game types for each, both being the same game type on a slightly different size map. So we have Warzone or Warzone, which is sort of point, capture and hold. Now what we'll do is we'll cross our damn fingers that we can actually get a game here, and we'll go for Warsaw, which I personally believe is the superior map aesthetically out of all of them. And here's where we come to one of the first, perhaps, points of discussion regarding gameplay. The waiting times for me have been highly variable. Supposedly and reportedly the servers are working, as it says down in the bottom left, or did when we weren't on this screen. The servers are working, but the queue times, the match times are not in a ideal state. Several times, and hopefully not this time, I've loaded into a game with 2 to 3 other people. This is on a map designed for, I think, 64 players, and it takes a good 5 to 10 minutes for the rest to join in. Now, I have had a little chat with someone who was in the tech test who insists that that was never the case. Games filled up fairly quick, although he was US and I am obviously EU, so there may be differences with time zones. It's very hard to say, but fortunately, we've got a game. We'll be loading into the capital right now. Right, a little lag spike there. Now you can choose attack or defense, and by the looks of it, I am the only person in my squad. And here we come to choosing the spawn points. It takes a few moments to just get your head around what's going on where, but this is basically the same domination mode you'll see within copious amounts of other games. You can choose to spawn on anything that is blue, anything that is red is occupied by an enemy. You cannot, as far as I'm aware, spawn on team members or things of that nature. If you double click one, you spawn on it instantly. And here we are within the game. Now, a good point to actually bring up the maps before we go on to the UI. Thank you very much for the intel. The maps themselves are built to scale, so your character, unlike in Battlefield, is actually proportionate to the actual area, and the area itself is actually based on the real-life locations. So those of you that have been to Warsaw may recognise the configuration of buildings. We'll obviously go outside shortly, have a little peep around, but so far, from what I've heard, and I've spoken to a few people, it's fairly accurate and does a fairly good job of portraying different areas, which I think is really interesting. And the different change in scale definitely has a very different appearance. Right, now I think the best thing to do is probably bring up some footage in the background so I can have this rolling while talking, because multitasking is going to make me even worse at FPSs, and I'm not that great at the best of times. Feel free to criticise me down below in the comments. One of the things I'd like to bring up first are the overall textures for this, and I think for an indie developer, this is a small developer, they have come out with some very aesthetically pleasing stuff. The Unreal Engine is clearly being pushed a little bit here, and things are looking good, but I would say every now and again you will still see textures that simply don't seem like they fit and match with some of the others. Now granted, it's early access. The current corridor I'm running through right now is definitely one of the better looking areas, and many of the streets, many of the roads, many of the buildings do look quite simply gorgeous. The fact that they're also to scale makes it really sort of, I don't know, postcard-esque, if that's even sort of a word. Well, it is now. In terms of the actual maps, I would give them a very good score though, because the design, the layout, the one-to-one scale, it all adds up to an experience which I would say does feel somewhat unique to the game and would be perhaps one of the selling points, although we're going to come back to later the implications of these map designs on the actual gameplay when we talk about the actual gameplay styles, etc. Before we go into that, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the UI. Now, being fairly minimal on the actual screen itself when we're actually in the combat, the UI is, I would say, similar to the actual title screen's UI. It's not bad, it does all of the functions. Selecting your different loadouts here on the left is completely doable, but I feel in many cases it's maybe just, and this may just be a personal preference, it's somewhat harder to get information at times. Some of the UI displays are a little bit smaller, some of the ally markers on the map, sometimes actually your own marker, the little green arrows to where you are. If there's enough stuff around that, I find it very hard to actually see. A little tip here, never change weapon when in the middle of combat just to pull out an RPG randomly. It's just a bad idea. Just keep a gun at hand at all times. But overall, this is a very minor gripe, and it's something that really small tweaks could be changed, but there has been 2 or 3 occasions where my character has been surrounded by other dots and other things, or even stood on a location or an objective which has been shielding my small arrow from, so I actually have no idea where I am on the map or where I'm orientated. It's a minor thing, and it's something that will probably be changed, but it's one of those gripes that I felt the need to voice. Now, looking at my allies as well, while we're discussing UI, you'll see a little square on each of them that signifies that this is an ally. Now, these squares are also highly unreliable. When part of a character is shielded, this square often disappears, and the amount of people I've seen shooting at their own allies within this game is quite frankly ridiculous. I have killed probably a good 10 to 15 friendlies. I have probably been killed a good 20 to 30 times by a friendly, because when there's a little bit of cover or at the wrong angle, if the sun's in your eyes, this marker is just simply absent, and that is again something that just simply needs to be fixed, needs to be ironed out, but right now does lead to a little bit of frustration within the gameplay, and also increased level of confusion as to what the fuck is going on. Obviously, they've gone with the design choice not to have a minimap, although you can have a minimap via a killstreak reward system. We're all familiar with those. It's like Call of Duty. You earn points, though, with this, and then you get to spend the points on the things, and you might have some change left over. It's not a case of, oh, well done, you got 3 kills in a row, here's your prizes. It's actually a case of, here's the total amount of points you've accumulated, you can put them towards something. So, I like that idea of a system. They don't seem too overpowered at the moment. You've got sort of the usual gadgets and toys that you can fly around, a small remote-controlled drone that can explode. You have the ability to cool down a quad bike if you did decide to choose a terrible spawn and spawn the opposite side of the map to the action you probably want to use that, unless you want to spend 5 minutes having a tour of Berlin. But yeah, there you go. And by the way, shout out to Berlin, which is being featured within this video. I think I'm about to get shot in the butt in a second. I've got that feeling here. Overall, though, the actual gameplay, I think it's time to talk about this. Traversing the map can be a little bit slow and arduous at times. If you find yourself spawning away from the action, the fact that the scale is built to reflect real life means that you are going to, yeah, okay, you can sprint quite fast as this guy. You're probably a lot fitter in this game than you are in real life, unless you're into marathons, but still, you're going to be spending a copious amount of time. I'm really saying copious a lot today. It's just word of the day. You're going to be spending a lot of time running back back and forth, unless you're lucky enough to be able to spawn on a squad leader who's not engaged in combat and not dead. That is probably 1 in 5 spawns that I found where I'm actually able to spawn on the squad leader, and when that's not the case, you're going to have to spawn at one of the locations which is not being attacked. This may or may not be near another one where there is action. So sometimes the action flows really well in this, and sometimes, you know, there's 30 seconds between every action engagement. When you die, it's not too long to go back in again, and other times there is a long wait, a long distance to travel. It can become quite awkward and cumbersome at times. Now, this, I think, is just a little bit of a sort of a feature of their design choice at the moment, the fact you can't spawn on any squad member. I do kind of support that. Having a bunch of enemies that basically reproduce like rabbits when hiding behind cover is not really the most immersive thing. When you see someone run behind cover, shoot at him a few times, 5 seconds later he pinches off another 5 allies, and then all of a sudden you're outnumbered. That really is a bit crap. And I'm fine with them doing away with that, but at times I do feel like spawning within maybe some of the tanks, having some troop carriers that could be mobilised around, or something to potentially add a little bit more options to the players in terms of spawning, might help out with this a little bit. But I'd be very curious to hear other players' thoughts and experiences. A lot of this comes down to chasing objectives, and if you are wandering around aimlessly looking for action, you're not going to find it. This game really relies on you looking at the map and moving towards the action. This is very, very far removed from Call of Duty, where you can spawn and you have a rough idea the enemy's outside of the map, I'm this side, let's head over there. This is constantly changing. As well as that, though, it's also constantly unpredictable. There are, and always seems to be, enemies popping out of nowhere, so it's very hard to hold tight and approach an objective from one angle. You will get flanked repeatedly, and some people will like that experience, some people won't. That's going to be something that may or may not shift as well, depending on metas, gameplay adjustments, etc. I have a feeling there will be changes made to this in terms of actually how the gameplay runs based on the larger feedback. Again, my feedback is only my own. This is my personal experiences and preferences. Everyone's going to like different things when it comes to games like this. Some people love Battlefield 2, some people love COD, some people love Halo. It's fine. We all like different things. But in terms of the gameplay, I do feel a little bit upset that, as far as I'm concerned, they've gone with my least favourite game mode from the Battlefield series. Again, although domination is not unique to Battlefield, they have gone with a game mode which has a capture and hold, or just simply capture and accumulate points. And I've always preferred the more dynamic versions like Rush or Conquest, or something that's got a little bit more spice behind it and moves you through. You have a collective objective all at once which you're trying to achieve. I think game modes like that have always worked a little bit better for me than this. I've always avoided anything that has multiple points on a map that you want to try and capture. I just simply don't find them as engaging. I find it leads to chaotic mishmash. But I'd fully appreciate some people might be thinking, well, actually, Hydra, that's really what I like. That's actually what makes this worth playing. Fair enough to you, I would say. Fair enough. So, overall impressions of the game: the gunplay is smooth and crisp. You can draw weapons out well enough. The actual weapon models themselves look good. The firing is adequate. It's fine. It's not a bad thing. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it feels fairly good. It feels fairly good. I think it's really the audio that feels, to me anyway, like it's maybe knocking them down a couple of points. Just everything sounds quite tinny. It sounds like I'm listening to everything through a cheap headset, and that sort of puts me off a little bit. The friendly fire, the UI, stuff like that is probably going to be changed realistically. That's something I think we can almost guarantee will get attention and love. Again, this is early access, and I'm just providing these points, A, so you know what you're buying, and B, so, well, you honestly know what I think of the game in its current state. I think a really good plan will be to come back to this in 6 months, or obviously play it a lot if you like it right now, but for me, I'll probably play it every now and again and do another recap in, say, 6 months to see what's happened and changed with the game. Because as it stands right now, I think the game has a huge amount of potential to capture the hearts of players from some of the FPS games that have just made design choices that have alienated them from the franchise. I don't know exactly which players that's going to be that are going to fall into this, because this right now seems to fit somewhere between Battlefield and Armour, but it's not really like Armour. It's more realistic than Battlefield in some respects, and I think that's maybe what's going to win over some people that like the milsim style games, which are sort of a little bit more heavily into realism, although this game's not hyper realistic. It's sort of somewhere in the middle, but it's also got the gunplay, which you could say, okay, maybe a COD player could get along with this, but this is going to be a very individual choice. This FPS dilemma as to what ones you like and don't like really is a tricky subject, and you've just got to look at the game and make your own mind up. In terms of the actual gameplay right now, though, it is semi-repetitive, although I have been told that one of the major features of the gameplay is missing, although it's not actually the gameplay of the campaign. The overall campaign and war screen has a sort of a resource management system where after doing a match, you can commit resources to help the war out as part of a global campaign. I like the idea of global campaign things and sort of feeling like you're part of a larger war. I don't know how that's actually going to work in terms of motivating me to play. We shall have to wait and see. And on the subject of motivation, I think it's also worth mentioning here. It's definitely worth mentioning that I've not completed a single match of this right now because, to be honest, I've gotten bored before the end of every single round because they're so fucking long. I wouldn't like to say exactly how long. This one's got 16 minutes left. I believe it's an hour, but it just gets monotonous too quickly for me. I haven't had the motivation to finish one. I generally get to about 10 minutes left and then sort of quit out. Call me a bad person if you will, but all of the gear's unlocked. There is no incentive to actually collect the money right now because they've given it to everyone as a apology for the disastrous launch. And that's where we're going to close the final statements. The servers are working. The majority of the negative reviews for this game are regarding the fact that the servers weren't working. This game had a disastrous start. Disastrous. I think it was almost 48 hours or so before anyone could play, and many people weren't able to play. Many people just sat in the options. Have a look at the negative reviews. Don't just take my word for it. The vast majority of them, if not nearly all of them, were simply stating that I couldn't play the game, so drop it a negative review, which is a shame, really, and it's almost a bit of an issue with the Steam reviews. Like, a negative review and I was unable to play due to server issues review are two different things, really, in terms of their value to a player. So this game has been very, very harshly punished due to that. But of course, if they are going to have ongoing server issues, that would be a problem. But as it stands, the tech test, as far as I'm aware, didn't have any problems. This was just a one-off. When the game launched, everything went to shit. No one could play for a while, and now it's all working fine. Maybe not working absolutely fine. I think I see the occasional person still that has some latency, connection, things like that, but I think you need to take the Steam score with a pinch of salt and read the reviews of the people that have actually played it. Read the positive reviews and see if they can sell them to you. Or simply just look at the goddamn gameplay and make your own mind up. I think the game is very interesting. I think it's a little bit different to some of the other titles. I think my aim is also terrible. But I think there will be a spot for this game within the hearts of players out there. If it gets more weapons, if it gets more maps, if it gets more customization options. I know it's already got a lot, but the more you can throw into this game to make it sort of skin and boxish, keep motivating people to jump on in, I think it'll get there. But the biggest one for me right now is game mode. Right now, the only game mode that this game is offering, even though there's two technically, they're similar enough. That's the only thing that's not really winning it over for me, but I think with time, this game is going to be certainly followed very closely by some, and it's going to have a fair bit of love sent over towards it. Guys, you've been wonderful. I hope this video has been of some use to you in terms of formulating some views and thoughts. Hope the gameplay has not been too offensive in terms of my accuracy. Let's see if we can get a little kill up here. You would think up in a crow's nest of sorts that I'm going to be able to kill someone. Let's have a see. One kill. Let's see if we can make it two. Come on, we've got to get two. Not too bad. And of course, then we get grenaded. A wonderful note to finish on. Guys, you've been wonderful. I'll see you again soon. Take care.